sure got to climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law.
Hello, everybody. It looks like we might have lost some audio there. I can't tell, but welcome to our webinar. My name is Dr. Shawnette Parker. I'm the Outreach Director for My SC Education, and thank you so much for joining me today and here with our special guest. I appreciate you taking some time to take the time out of your day, and maybe you're eating your lunch right now while you're watching everything, and I appreciate you doing that. Just a few housekeeping things before we get into what we are going to talk about today. This is going to be the first of many webinars, we hope, and I am definitely interested in hearing from you directly, letting me know what it is that you need help with or the topics that you would like for us to discuss. So it's really important that you communicate with me. I want to make sure that you make note of the chat box here along the side. Please make sure that you share any comments that you have. But if you have any specific questions that you want to make sure that we get to throughout this time, please make sure and click on the Ask the Question box. That helps highlight those, because as the chat scrolls along, we might miss some of those things. Throughout this process, I might even launch a poll just to get your feedback as well. This platform is a little bit different than Zoom. Many of you have probably been on Zoom or in Teams meetings, and so it doesn't operate the same to where we see everyone's faces up at one time. However, there will be opportunity for you to speak should you choose to do so, and you'll just flag that inside of the chat box and say, hey, can I come on camera for a moment to be able to share something? Or I might even call on you and ask if you'd be willing to come up on camera to be able to talk a little bit further. I'm hoping that this will be a fruitful opportunity for you to ask questions, to hear what we have to say about Advocacy 101. But I'm also interested in learning more from you and your experiences when it comes to advocacy work. So as we jump into this, one other thing, I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure you all know, while we're located in South Carolina and we will be talking about some South Carolina specific things, I do want to welcome those of you who are in a different state and appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this. We're talking about our lawmaking process in general and advocacy in general, so it applies across other states. And we know here in South Carolina that we can learn from other places and what you're doing. And it's very common for us to also cite different things that are happening in different states as we're trying to get certain laws passed here. And I know that other places do the same thing. So I just welcome you into this space so that we can learn from one another. Please allow me to introduce my special guest today. First, I want to introduce Ms. Ellen Weaver. She is the president and CEO of Palmetto Promise Institute. And has been working with national and state lawmakers for nearly 20 years. She's a product of choice herself, and she's particularly passionate about making sure every child in South Carolina has the opportunity of an education that meets their needs. She loves history, travel, singing, and playing the piano, and her three sweet mutts. And I must say that Ellen has become a dear friend of mine within this work. We've worked together greatly. She's a great confidant, and we all need these to be able to go to someone when we're just like, am I crazy? I'm very transparent, and I just say it like it is, and I don't pretend to know everything. And so, Ellen, I thank you for being that person to either sometimes talk me off the ledge or just make sure and let me know that I am on the right path. So thank you for joining me today, Ellen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean. It's great to be with you.
I appreciate that. And I know that there's some things going on, and we're going to kind of even not so much touch on what's happening, but just being very clear that sometimes when you live in this world with laws and legislators and things come up, we have to be prepared for anything. So I know things are busy on your end. So I appreciate you just still taking the time to be a part of this. Second, I'd like to introduce Dr. Orrin Smith. He has developed a reputation as a trusted advisor and public policy advocate during his many years of service in the Palmetto State. His prior service includes 17 years as president of Palmetto Family Council, COO of the South Carolina Business Industry and Political Education Committee, and regional director in the office of Governor Carol Campbell. Dr. Smith holds a PhD in political science and a Master of Public Administration from the University of South Carolina, and has also studied at Clemson and George Washington University. He has served on the Board of Trustees for Coastal Carolina University since its independence in 1993, where he chairs the Academic Affairs Committee. He is a native of Greer. Dr. Smith has authored numerous books and publications, and I can say that I turn to Dr. Smith for all things South Carolina, his knowledge of history and facts, and it's always interesting, and I get a fun story out of him, and there's things that I would never think of or never know, and I appreciate you for having that information on hand, and when I need to know something about South Carolina, I feel like, I bet Orrin knows. So Orrin, can you unmute yourself and go ahead and just say hello to me? And I appreciate you being here. I need you to unmute. Something's happening there. I apologize. As he's doing that and I'll notice when he does unmute, and I apologize, we prepare for all of these things and think that we're working through all of the technology, and things still start to happen. So I think you might, if you hover over your own picture, Orrin, you might have to click that and unmute yourself.
Well, Shawnette, while that's happening, I just want to say what a joy it is to work with you. Your energy that you bring to this work is just incredible.
So much. I appreciate that. Well, Orrin is going to, yes. Okay. So we have our back end folks working, we go through all this to try to make it happen. I'm not sure what's happening on Orrin's end, but Orrin, if you'd like, and I know that you and Ellen are actually in the same office, you can actually just go and sit next to Ellen if you'd prefer, because I don't want to spend too much time trying to figure that out. I'm not sure why you're not able to unmute yourself, but I know that he's happy to be here along with us, and we're going to move along, and then we'll make sure we hear, because he does have some valuable information that we're going to get to. As I said, to those of you who are out there in the audience watching, please feel free to interject, ask questions. If there's something that I'm not getting to that you were coming here for, please share that. As a matter of fact, I'd be happy for you to also just tell me, like, what was the purpose for you coming here? And yes, Ms. Birch, I do see that. I know we saw there's some feedback from Ellen's mic, and we're going to try to troubleshoot that. I have actually a great team in the background that you guys can't see. Joe and Brom are working feverishly, and I know they're like, what do we do? And I want to make sure that they know, and I'll just say it publicly, it's okay. We're going to navigate this thing together. In the world of technology, it's great when it works, and sometimes when it doesn't, it's no big deal. So I want to just let you guys know that I know you're working in the background to make sure this happens, and it's okay. But we're going to go ahead and jump into that, and we'll see if we're able to get our slides pulled up. And I'll take a moment to pause. I know Brom is working to do that and figure out the audio. Thank you so much for that feedback, Ms. Birch. I appreciate that. We try to give the best experience. We're having to embrace the fact that we are in this virtual world, and we're going to continue to do that. And we're trying to find the best ways and the best technology to be able to use. And I promise you, through all of our technology checks, and everything was just running smoothly. And then wouldn't you know it, you get here. And I think it's no different than if we were in person and you have your PowerPoint set up and everything, and the next thing you know, you can't get the system to work. But we'll go with it, and hopefully you'll still think that the content is good. So appreciate that feedback. So moving on to our first slide, and it's something that I just wanted us to think about. And in particular, if we think about grassroots work. And I want to pose a question to you all. When I think of advocacy, that's the first thing that I think of. I think of it in terms of different grassroots movements. And you'll see I have a few different pictures up here. And I just want to even pose a question to you guys as I talk about this is what comes to mind when you think of a grassroots movement? And what does that mean for you? And as I'm sharing what I think, I would love to see you guys pose that in the chat. Grassroots movements are bottom-up movements, meaning that they come from what sometimes I might even in naming myself as one of the little people, right? It's from the everyday person who just feels like something is amiss, something's not working in my community, and they decide to get something done. One of the biggest things that I want to pinpoint when we talk about grassroots movements is that even if we're not a part of that specific movement, we're all affected by that. And that's really important for us to understand. There's tons of movements that are going on in our world, in our society. And sometimes we might think that we can turn a blind eye to it. And yes, community, when we think of grassroots movements. And it's about bringing that community together. But sometimes we think we can turn a blind eye to different movements that are taking place around us and think that they won't affect us, but we're always going to even be indirectly affected by them. Even if there's movements happening that don't directly connect with our values and beliefs, we have to recognize, and if we're being culturally competent within our societies, that it's important for us to still pay attention to those. So grassroots implies getting at the root of the change and not just mowing the grass. I love that, Marie Owens. That is so true. It's not about just mowing the grass. And if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's not being on the surface of it. And I think that might also be one of the problems that we have sometimes in grassroots work or advocacy, is that we're not really looking at the root of the problem, the heart of the problem, thinking about what really needs to take place to get things to change. And we have these surface things that happen, and we're throwing so many ideas at a problem without really taking a step back and saying, what's really happening here? And a lot of times with grassroots work, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily wrong, because sometimes we're led by our passion and we just jump out there. A lot of times we do have to step back. We'll jump into it and say, okay, there's a problem. I don't like what's happening here. I'm going to rally my folks together. We're going to start yelling and screaming about all these things that are going on. And then when you realize, just as Marie Owens pointed out, that guess what? We're not really affecting change, and we're throwing out all these solutions, but do we really truly know what the problem is? So that's just something I want us to think about, what grassroots looks like. And I want us all to also consider that you can be a part of that movement. And there's different levels. Everybody doesn't have to be the person who's marching in the streets. Everybody doesn't have to be the person who's writing the op-eds or calling the lawmakers. There's a place for everybody. And hopefully by the end of this session, you start to identify kind of what your place is, or there's a time and a place for everything. So even if you are that person who does all of these different things, there's moments in which there's appropriate movements to make. So we'll move on to our next slide. So I want to talk about just this human action grassroots model. And for those of you who don't know me, I am what I consider an educator first. I am a psychology professor, and I do rely a lot on different research and information that I found. And actually, the conversation about the human action grassroots model really actually comes from social economists. And if we go back, Ludwig von Mises was a very well-known social economist and talked about what needs to happen in order for our economies to thrive. And so this is where some of this information has come from. And just looking at what that human action grassroots model is. What does it mean for us as humans to start taking action on something? And he says that there's 3 components that need to be present. And he first says that we identify this dissatisfaction with the present state of affairs, right? When we recognize, and usually that dissatisfaction, it's when we recognize that not all people are being served well, or not everybody is thriving the way that we would like to see them happen. And so that's what then sparks our interest in wanting to make a change. Then we start to envision a better state of affairs, right? We start to think about, okay, well, I know that there could be something better out there, and I'm trying to start to think about what is it, or what idea do I have about what could make things look better. And then that third piece, he says that we have a belief that we can reach a better state. So even if we don't know the exact plan, we believe that something can be done, right? And this is, I think, one of the criticisms sometimes when it comes to grassroots work, is because then when we look at what the top down part, the people who are in leadership will often criticize people like us and saying, well, you know, you really didn't think it out. You really don't have a plan. And that's where an organization like MyC Education and Palmetto Promise comes into work, and trying to make sure that we can help everyday people formulate that plan better. And so what he says is, but if one of those requirements is missing, we tend not to act. People will not act if we haven't had this level of dissatisfaction, if we don't have a vision for a better state, and if we don't believe that things can get better, we probably won't act. So I want to pause there just for a moment, and whether it be a rhetorical question or get you guys to comment or say something, think about a change that you wanted to see, or an attempt that you wanted to make to get people to organize, but it failed. And why do you think it failed? Were you called upon to be a part of something, and this grassroots type movement, but what caused it to fail is what I'm curious in you guys thinking about. So I know it's a little awkward sometimes in this setting, and I'm not going to pause too long, but if you're thinking about that, and you can share that in the chat. And again, I want to remind you, if you want to come up and speak on it, we're happy to bring you up on camera so that you can speak on that. I'll pause. Oren, can we?
Johnette,
yeah.
can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can definitely hear you. So go ahead if you have any thoughts, and just this conversation and just like grassroots work and where we are with that.
Yes. Well, thank you for that sort of a tour of the relevant literature, because those German philosophers had an idea of what they call alienation. And that is when a person feels disconnected from their society, from their government, and they don't have any ability to make any change. And the history of South Carolina, it is a history of alienation, because a lot of people, large number of people at the bottom, a few people at the top, the folks at the bottom could not influence those at the top. It was a very closed system. But I have seen numerous times in recent years when issues or concerns, nobody gave it a chance to actually become a law. It was just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, but it actually became a law. One example of that recently was there was a group of firefighters who were developing cancer. And because of a certain state law, there was a way to provide insurance for these firefighters. So if they developed cancer, they would have a way to cover their health insurance benefits. And when those firefighters came to the State House and they testified, it was very, very moving. So I just want to say what you said earlier was so true. The way people feel like they don't have any power. And in South Carolina, it was that way for a long time. But more and more individuals and groups that get organized and form these movements are having an effect. And it's very exciting to see that.
A little piece of what you said on the end there is an echo. I know and I know you guys are watching, we're going to continue to work that out. And I'm not sure if there's another computer open or if we're picking up something from the other space, but that your last couple of words, I did miss that part. Just want to be transparent and not pretend that I heard you, because I know none of us probably did. And I know we're still trying to troubleshoot over there. So the only thing, I also think it might be helpful if there's any other kind of window open, or it's like if there's a major echo coming from you all.
Shawnette, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I know you're getting a really bad echo. We have it on this end too. I'm wondering if we might just need to reschedule this once we can get the test check, because we're kind of out of options here about changing anything.
Okay, don't change anything. I think I'm going to move forward with the folks that we have here. I don't want to lose you guys, even if that means that you have to type in, or if there's a way for you to click out and maybe try to come back in. I know that Brahm and Joe are still on the back end trying to work this, so I'm going to continue with my conversation. I definitely don't want to lose this piece, but maybe we can try that before we completely just cancel.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, we're going to log off and try to get back in again.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, we'll continue to move forward, and I'll move forward to the next slide. So when I think about the, just in totality, just this human action grassroots model, I decided to then just apply that. And as we talk about education grassroots movements, right? And taking those 3 points that Ludwig von Mises had indicated and applying those to what that looks like if we talk specifically about education grassroots movements. And point number 1, and we can look at it saying, it's when parents who have a dissatisfaction with the present state of their child's education, and you know, it's a lot of times for us as parents, that dissatisfaction may start on an individual basis. And some of what I want to talk about today and move past is, yes, we look at our individual children, but also just looking at what's for the greater good of education. And we'll talk about those 3 different areas of, you know, just education advocacy. But oftentimes it starts off with our own child, and if we notice something, or within our own community. So maybe it's not our child. You might be an ally out there and you may not have a child, but you're talking specifically, just you see something that's not right with the state of education with either children close to you or your own child. Then parents start to have this vision for a better state of education for their children. I'm sure that all of us probably have this idea of what education could look like or should look like, or what at least what we want for our own child. And in that vision, we say, you know, we know it'll work for our own child or the community that we're close to. Certainly this could work for other people. And this is where it starts to get sticky, because we don't have all of the answers. And then that third piece that makes parents want to move forward and act in this work is that we believe that we can reach this better state of education for our children. We wouldn't do this work if we didn't think that. We wouldn't be committed. You wouldn't be on here right now even trying to figure out, like, does she have something to share that's going to help move us forward? So we know that something can be done. We know that something's out there. We just don't know what. And I'll tell you, that's the hard part, and sometimes the frustrating and exhausting part of doing this kind of work, of being an advocate, of being within this advocacy space, is because you do want to give up sometimes, right? You do feel like there are moments where the end is not near, that there's no solution. I'm going to be honest and say there's moments where I've wanted to say, okay, I quit. Let's just, I turned out okay. I went through education and I'm tired of trying. But then you look and you see children who are either struggling, or you see the successes actually sometimes even. You say, you know what? I can't stop this fight. I'm going to continue to push forward. Ellen, I see you pop back in. Are we getting it worked out?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can. That's so much better.
Okay, good. Well, and I just want to jump in and say, you know, if we don't fight, who will? That's what keeps me motivated in all of this, is that our children are just worth too much to say we tried. You know, we've got to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the thing that we need to consider is even those small wins. I think sometimes when we're doing this work, and particularly for me, working with an organization like Mindset Education, or in partnership with Palmetto Promise, and we're at the State House and we're trying to get laws passed, I sometimes feel like I'm not successful until that bill gets passed. You know what I mean? When the SAFE grants got pushed back on, I was just like, oh, we failed. But then having to remind myself that, you know what, it's not a failure, because with the little work that we're doing on a daily basis, even if one child's life or one family's life has been positively affected, we're still doing our job and we can't quit. So go ahead, Ellen.
Absolutely. So much of this work too is just about changing the conversation. So much of policy just life in general, it becomes just the status quo. We do things this way because we've always done things this way. And, that's my passion in education, is that what we're doing works for many children, but there are children that it's not working for. And those children aren't inconsequential. They are valuable. And we have got to figure out different ways of thinking about education. And so, like you said, even when you have a setback that's disappointing, like what happened on the SAFE grants, it's not the end of the road. I think that that's what was so encouraging for anyone on the video who was able to join you for the conversation you had with Miss Virginia. Miss Virginia didn't give up. She faced really long odds and she didn't give up, and she ended up winning in the end. So it's just all about the perseverance in the fight. It really is.
Right. And I think one of the things to consider and remind people, it took her 10 years. We watched that movie and we're like, oh, it happened in 2 hours. It was actually a 10-year fight. So I guess that's encouraging for me to know that I have a little ways to go, because I haven't been in this for 10 years. I want to read this comment from Ms. Birch. I thought that the ideas and strategic goals were clear, but the timelines are unrealistic. We need a stronger assessment of our team strengths and weaknesses. We learn to regroup and find inspiration in the small victories along the way. I want to hear a little bit more about what you're talking about, because I'm assuming, Ms. Birch, that you're talking in relationship to and I'm not sure if this is just a delay in popping up, but when you were engaged in grassroots work, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to miss that before I move on. Would you be interested in popping up on camera so that we can hear you explain more? And I'm going to pause a little bit because it could be a internet delay.
The root of change, not just mowing the grass, right? And I couldn't agree more. A lot of times we talk about symptoms instead of actually treating the real problem. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Marie. I totally agree.
Yeah. We'll see. And after I have a video, but I think what Ms. Birch is talking about here, oh, she doesn't have a camera attached to the moment, but okay. So you can chat and let me know, but let's see if I'm interpreting what you're saying. And you're like, and I think it's speaking to when we are in these movements and we're asked to be, to get work done, and what caused them to fail. I think that's what you're talking about. And she said, I thought the ideas and strategic goals were clear, but the timelines were unrealistic. And I found myself in that situation before, many a times, where the timelines, I was too aggressive about it. And you think sometimes that you can handle it, and then things implode. And I think in this work, I've also had to realize that failure is feedback. Yes, thank you so much. It was an answer to the prompt. And so in this work, failure has to be our feedback, and reminding ourselves that if you set out to do advocacy work, none of it is really failure. Like, we might not win every case. We might not change the minds of every lawmaker, but the fact that we're taking steps to do something is a step in the right direction. And then we can look at what didn't work as well as we would have liked it to work and build upon that. But to me, the only failure is not doing anything. And I think Ellen said that, like, right, we have too many people and too many kids that need help, and we've only failed if we choose not to act. Would you agree with that, Ellen?
Absolutely, 100%.
So I want to share a video, and I want to kind of just start to move along and shift our conversation, because I promise you I'm not going to keep you on here forever. As we look at these 3 components of just like what pushes us to act in education grassroots movements. Anybody who knows me, I believe that good solutions and conversation comes out of sometimes when you're in uncomfortable positions, and I like to address some of even those hard conversations. So I found this video, and this had circulated some years ago, and just me to initiate and to get some thoughts stirring in terms of our thoughts about the state of education. But I want to be clear, I don't think that all education is bad. We have had some great successes in just our overall system of education. I think that my 6 children, for the most part, have been educated quite well with the partnership of my husband and I, along with the schools in which they attend. I love going into schools and seeing all the great things that are happening in schools. I am an educator myself. I know plenty of teachers. I belong to a sorority in which our foundation, we were built by educators. So I always like to make that clear that I'm not saying that our education system is just shot and that it's horrible. But I do think, again, if we're talking about this grassroots movements and the reason why we become these strong advocates with things, it's because we notice something isn't right and we need to address those things. If everything was perfect, we probably wouldn't be in this work. We just have all these great celebrations. So I want to show a video, and this is from a young man. Jeff Bliss is his name. He's not a young man anymore. He's older. And it was a cell phone video that was recorded in the classroom of an issue that he was having. I don't think this was actually a traditional public school. I think it was a charter school that he was attending. But I want you, as we play this short clip, just to think about, just your thoughts on this clip, but what is, or how would you describe our current state of education as a whole? Whether we're thinking South Carolina specific or just in our country, United States, just thinking about education and how this clip, is it a reflection on what's happening or is it not? I mean, but this was a real situation that happened. So I'll pause and let's watch this one together.
This freaking lady go off on kids because they don't freaking get this crap. Man. If you would just get up and teach them instead of handing them a freaking packet, yo. There's kids in here who don't learn like that. Bye. They need to learn face to face. You're just getting mad because I'm pointing out the obvious. No, and you're wasting my time. No, I'm not wasting your time. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you what you need to do. Get out. You want kids to come in your class? You want them to get excited for this? You got to come in here. You got to make them excited. You want a kid to change and start doing better? You got to touch his freaking heart. Can't expect a kid to change if all you do is just tell him. You gotta take this job serious. This is the future of this nation. And when you come in here, like you did last time, and make a statement about, oh, this is my paycheck, indeed it is. But this is my country's future and my education. I respect that. Can you go outside, please? But there's a limit. When I'm not, but simply making an observation. Okay. And now I will leave. You're welcome. And if you would like, I'll teach you a little more so you can actually learn how to teach a freaking class. Because since I got here, I've done nothing but read packets. So don't try and take credibility for teaching me jack. Just go. Bye. Little baby.
So, your thoughts in that moment. I know it might take a moment for you all to populate that. Ellen, do you have any immediate thoughts about that? I know she has to take that.
Well, I think it highlights that there can be a lot of different reasons why a student would need different options. I think to me, that video is certainly shocking, and I don't think that's necessarily representative of most of what happens in schools today. I would certainly hope that that's the exception to the rule, but I think it really does highlight that different students learn differently and have different needs. And we can't take for granted that just one size fits all is going to work for every child.
Absolutely. And I think for me, what it showed me is that, number one, in that moment, and we're going to talk about what it means to be an advocate, that young man was an advocate for himself in that moment, even if it may not have been the right way. And I'll tell you background, he ended up getting suspended. So it wasn't like something that was brushed under the rug, whether you agree that he should or not. I mean, obviously that's not our conversation at this point, but he did end up getting suspended. But he happened to have been a dropout that came back into school, right? And so that told me a lot of things too, that he was trying. And yet he came back into this space where he was previously, and he still wasn't getting help. And like you said, Ms. Birch, he was disrespectful, so the school still dealt with him that way. But he had the passion. And that's sometimes where a lot of this work comes from with us. And this is why I do the work that I'm doing in this space, is saying, let's see how we can channel that passion that you have, and let's make sure that it's going to be heard. Because unfortunately, when we go out and we just start screaming and yelling, it shuts people off, right? But I wish I could work with a child like that. And if there's parents out there like that, because internally, I think I'm that parent. I think I was that child. I can remember I had moments actually where I was up against, I haven't started this work just in my 40s. I remember being in the 6th grade and sitting in the principal's office with one of the cafeteria workers and my mom, because I had a blow up moment. Now, again, as an adult, I look back, it was disrespectful, but I wasn't happy with what she was saying to us. And I decided to speak up then. But this is why we have to kind of shape what's happening. And as Elise said, the student showed me that he himself was an advocate. Absolutely. And that's where it starts. So it's like, how do we then move past that? Any other thoughts before I move on and just talk about advocacy? Just your thoughts on just what education, what's happening in our current state? Like, why are we even choosing to be a part of this work? What are some of the things that we want to see changed? Aside, I know Ellen pinpointed the need for different options. You guys want to add more, Ellen or Oren?
I just think the point that you made about channeling your advocacy is critical. And I know we're going to get into that going forward, but you are spot on, is that you can have all the passion in the world and you can have truth and justice on your side. But if you don't channel that constructively, you can sometimes do more harm than good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what, so for me, and I'll repeat again, I think in general, the kids are good. The kids are all right. Kids are learning. Education is a fantastic place. I love being in schools and different things like that. But I do think, and even though that situation, and like with Jeff Bliss, that was maybe an exception, it depends on where you're from, because I hear tons of horror stories just as much as I hear the fantastic stories. But to me, even if it was 1 or 2 or 3 or a handful of kids who are experiencing that, that tells us there's something to stand up for. That we can't say, okay, well, that's only 5 kids. And we know it's more than 5 kids. We know it's more than 100 kids. We know there's thousands of children who aren't being served well and that are having some very poor experiences, more so probably just because they're not in a school that matches their needs. And this is why we push so much for having this education choice and finding the place that fits for you. But for me, that tells me that when I think about our current state of education, it's just that if we're having moments like that happen, that tells us that we need to have more options for people and more places for people to go, and to be able to get what they need. There need to be better places for a child like Jeff Bliss. Like, why did he drop out in the first place? And it's not a simple answer. I'm sure there was a lot of factors in his life, but that's what it tells me about this work and why I'm choosing to be an advocate for the growth and change in education, because even if there's one kid falling behind the cracks, it's one kid too many. So in thinking about this, and you guys see up here, I have on this slide, an advocate. So we all probably agree, a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or a policy. And I think a lot of times, and in that video, and when I've watched some of the follow-up with Jeff Bliss, I don't even think that he realized he was being an advocate, and that he kind of, even in his small community, started some sort of movement. And that's a lot of times where it starts. And I just, as it's in my head, because people know me, I kind of jump back and forth. One thing that I want to pinpoint: no, I am not an advocate for disrespect or doing things in a way that is not appropriate. But I will say, and this is just my personal opinion, sometimes you have to make your voice heard. Sometimes in different spaces, and you have to make those choices for yourself, how far you're going to go out there. Now, in most situations, if you truly want to be heard and you want to have people sit down and listen to you, you have to be strategic with this work. But I personally am not always, I don't push back on people who sometimes, if you feel like you've been yelling to the top of your lungs in the most respectful way possible and people still aren't hearing you, sometimes that's where things kind of come to a head, and we have to figure that out. So if he were my student, I think I would have worked with him a little differently. But so let's talk about types of advocacy. And I want to pinpoint 3 different types. I look at advocacy, particularly when we're talking about education advocacy, as child level advocacy, school district advocacy, or that school or the school district, and then education policy or this larger legislative advocacy, if we'll use that. So what do I mean when I talk about student advocacy? And none of this is rocket science, and I know that you guys understand this, but I just want to kind of spell it out for us. You know, when we talk about child or student advocacy, this is where we're saying, you know, you have children who need someone to look out for them. This looks like helping them toward their academic success. Student advocates, some of the words that I lifted, they empower, they give advice, they provide encouragement, they're that listening ear, they're the voice for that child. And so oftentimes we are, as parents, are really great about being our child's advocate. We can also find teachers and other adult allies who are willing to do that. But just making it clear that that student level advocacy is you have that one child in mind. You're looking at that child as an individual. As parents, when we're making choices about where to send our children for schools, we are that working in student advocacy, right? We're saying this is what's best for my child, and that's all I'm thinking about right now. And sure, some of the things you might be talking about or things that you do could help other children. But usually when we're making those individual choices, we're thinking about that child in that moment and what we need to do to make the space that they're in work for them. School advocacy, though, is a little different. And the first thing that I think of when I say school advocacy, there's a Gestalt, right? And the Gestalt theory of perception, where he says that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And I'll say that again. So the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And I think this is where we start to, it gets tricky and difficult for people, because when we're advocating for an entire school or an entire school district, we're no longer thinking about individual children, right? We're thinking about them, but we have to think of them as the whole. Like, so we can't say, okay, I have 5 kids, and if I just add up all 5 kids, these kids' issues, then that is the problem there. No, when I say the whole is more than the sum of its parts, we have to then start considering all the stakeholders that are involved in that school. So it's the school leadership, it's the community, it's all the students, it's the parents, it's the families. And when you're being an advocate for an entire school, sometimes individuals don't matter anymore. I hope that makes sense. And you guys, please chime in and let me know if you feel like I'm off on something, or if you have a question about something. When we think about school level advocacy, it's about the majority, right? The majority benefiting, and sometimes if the majority is benefiting, individuals may not fully benefit, at least not directly. So if I think about my child at Second Baptist Christian Prep, I am a blessed, privileged individual in terms of what I'm able to do as far as sending my child to a private school, being able to make that choice, being able to do that without any assistance, right? And making sure that that happens for my son. But I am a strong advocate for opportunities that would support the other children that go to that school. I advocate for that school. The SAFE grants would have been that thing to help other families. My child would not have been able to take advantage of it. If we get an education scholarship account program here in South Carolina, like other states has, my child would not directly benefit, but I'm going to continue to advocate for something like that because I know the whole school would. And I know the whole just area, the district, and he would indirectly benefit from those things because we'd be able to have great teachers, more great teachers come there. We'd have more students at the schools and those types of things. So that's what I mean when I say this school level advocacy, because it's not about my individual child anymore. I might even be fighting for something that won't directly affect him. I'll pause for a second just to see if anyone else has anything to say, or Ellen or Oren, do you want to give some feedback on that?
No, I think you covered it. I think you covered it well.
Okay, great. So this moves us then to, and this is where Oren, and I want to transition. So we talked about, so when we're talking about student level advocacy, it's the individuals in mind. When we're saying school advocacy, we're talking about just what can we do, what programs, what systems, what changes, how can I work with administration? What are the things that are going to help us for the school? And again, let me pause for a second. So who can be school advocates? I will let you guys know there's people who are hired in districts who are like lawyers, or they work in the disability services, that are trained advocates. But I also just want to say that as individual parents, we can advocate for different things within the schools. When you're going in there and you're working with your child, or you're in the community and you see different things that are not serving all of the children well, this is where we start to speak up. And before we get off of here, we're going to talk specifically about, well, what do you do when you notice a problem, and what steps do you take to make those changes? But anybody can, be a school level advocate. But this is, you probably have noticed, like in your public school districts especially, they have hired individuals who are there, who are supposed to be doing regular needs assessments and trying to figure out what's happening and what changes need to take place so that more children are benefited. Or oftentimes there's this heavy focus on those who are marginalized the most, or who are served the least. Okay. So within this, again, when we're talking about how we become better advocates, understanding children, understanding the school as a whole, or the district as a whole, we then start to approach the larger system, right? So when we start putting all of our South Carolina districts together, and then we start looking at education policy and what that means and what that looks like, this is where it starts to get a little confusing for me. And this is why I've asked for Orrin and Ellen to be a part of this, because even though you guys have reassured me a lot of times when we're at the State House that I got it and I understand, sometimes I'm like, I don't got it. That's what I feel like. And so Orrin, I personally, and I could be wrong, right? That happens a lot, but help me, because it always seemed to have helped me as I start to first understand the foundation. We talk about education policy, and the reason why I showed that I'm just a bill video at the beginning was to kind of get us to thinking about, just if we want to be better advocates in education policy, we need to even understand how that works. So walk us through a little bit this whole how a law becomes a law, and where we fit into this. And I believe on the back end, folks, they're changing over that link. Don't click it yet, but we're going to you can click on the link on the bottom where it says that green button, and it'll take you to this full document so you can look at it. So Orrin, go ahead.
All right. Well, believe it or not, what you're looking at is a simplified version of how a bill becomes a law, how a bill gets from being lonely sitting on Capitol Hill to actually being legislation. I think maybe if I could put you in the picture, just imagine during the days before COVID, when the legislature was wide open, and if we were to go up the steps of the State House, those big main steps right out front, go up those steps and go into the lobby. When the legislature's in session, it's a beehive. It is a lot of people running around, not appearing to know exactly what they're doing. Some of them probably don't know what they're doing, but the way to get change, the way to actually move change forward, involves engaging in that somewhat crazy process. So the way not to do it is, I would not recommend making a great big poster and just walking up the front steps and into the lobby and sort of walking around with that great big poster, because the passion is important. And your clip that you play, you've absolutely got to have somebody, numerous people that have a lot of passion about the issue. But based on this chart you're looking at, it has to be channeled into the legislative process. And the legislative process, if you remember from your 8th grade civics or 10th grade government or senior year government, there is a House, there is a Senate, there is a governor. And in South Carolina, the House and the Senate, the legislative branch, is very powerful. So you've got to start from the beginning. And first of all, you have to have a properly drafted piece of legislation. And in order to do that, you have to have a sponsor. So every bill that's sitting on Capitol Hill has to have a member of the House or the Senate or both be the sponsor, to be the one to actually introduce it into the process, because the average person can't write a bill and put their name on it and submit it to the legislature and say, I want you to take a vote on that. So once you have that sponsor, then you start at the very beginning. And in South Carolina, the very beginning is a subcommittee. And a subcommittee is where the members of the legislature who have sort of defined themselves into a very small group, sometimes 3 or 5, who are on a committee that's assigned to a particular area of policy. So for instance, often when we're interested in education policy, the committee would be the Committee on Education and Public Works. I don't know why transportation and all of that stuff is tacked on, but on the House side, it's Education and Public Works. So license tag bills go through that same committee. In the Senate, it's education. And that small group, that subcommittee, in South Carolina, that's the only place that they have a way of publicly hearing from citizens. They have hearings. Sometimes they will have a hearing on a bill that lasts 15 minutes. It may last all day long. It may last multiple days, depending on the type of legislation it is. And that committee, that subcommittee, that piece of a bigger committee, they're the workers. They're supposed to get the legislation right. They're supposed to get the wording right and the law right. And they have a legal staff that helps them do that. But based on what they hear in those committee hearings, that is how they massage the content of that bill. Then it goes to the full committee. And once it passes the full committee, then it can go to the floor, to the House floor or to the Senate floor. And then it has to pass the floor, on the floor twice, second reading and third reading, in order to go to the other side. So that whole process, subcommittee, full committee, floor, starts all over on the other side of the building. It starts in the House, has to go to the Senate. If it starts in the Senate, it has to go to the House. And then once the language of the Senate and the House is exactly the same, it can be what is known as enrolled, and it can be ratified, and it can be sent downstairs. Up at the State House, when they talk about downstairs, they're referring to the governor. The governor sort of rents space in the State House. The legislature claims it's their house. The governor's sort of a tenant who lives downstairs. So once the governor signs it, then it becomes a law. But within that process, the legislators have to have some reason for being for it or being against it. And the way I like to think about it is there's at least 2 parts in a legislator's mind as to why he or she would be for or against a piece of that legislation. And that is, they are either getting some really good professional advice about it from people that are trained to know about it. And that would be Palmetto Promise Institute in many cases, or MySC Education. That's the expertise about the content of that legislation. But the other part is, and this is a very old-fashioned phrase that I will use, and that is, the dogs need to bark back home. And that means that legislator actually got an email, a phone call, somebody tugged on his jacket at church or at the Rotary Club or at the Christmas parade and said, hey, H 3425 means a lot to me and my family. So if there is a person, and I'm sorry to use the example of a dog, but if a person is barking back home and telling the legislator we need this, and if people that the legislators perceive as knowledgeable are telling them it's a good idea, that sometimes gets you over the finish line to get the bill passed. So that's generally how the process works, but it's absolutely critical to have expertise and to have people contacting their legislators. And that's where this advocacy comes in, where you're actually letting your legislator know. And here's one more thing to remember. If your legislator is on the committee that hears the bill, wow, you are really important, extra important, because your legislator has a big part in that process if he or she is on that committee. If your legislator is on the subcommittee, which is even a smaller part of that committee, wow, your advocacy is even more important, because that's the initial step in the process to get it moving. So every legislator is not on every committee. So if you come in there and hold your big sign and say, take action now, and they finally introduce you to your legislator, he may say, or she may say, I can help you with that, but actually I'm not on that committee. If they are on the committee, your advocacy kind of has an extra oomph to it. So generally, that's how a bill becomes a law in South Carolina.
So when it comes to, because I'm trying to think about where we insert ourselves within this, and so I heard a lot, and I was trying to take notes for folks, and I hope that helped, because this is good stuff to me, and I hope that you guys think so too. The subcommittee process is probably the best place where our voices can be heard the most. But I'm wondering, and I even before you answer that, going back to where you said, okay, everyday people, we can't introduce bills. But let's say we're this parent and we have this idea, and we know something needs to change. And we're talking grassroots movements that we are, trying to get something done. Who do we approach? Is it MySC Education? Is it Palmetto Promise to say, how can you do this? Or do you seek to just contact your legislator directly and you start trying to put bugs in their ear and hoping that they'll pick it up and write something or whatever, and that kind of thing? Like, is there a chance for our small ideas to turn into big ideas and laws just coming from the parent, or do you have to wait till something is taken up and goes into a subcommittee?
Well, it can start many different ways. Sometimes a parent may have an idea that they share with a legislator, and that legislator may assign a staff member to go out and find out if that idea is already working somewhere else.
Okay.
And in Washington, you've got lots of people that claim to be experts. They're not a part of the government. They're independent of the government that are playing a role in the process. In South Carolina, we really don't have that many organizations outside of the government. That's why, to toot our own horn a little bit, that MySC Education and Palmetto Promise are so important, because we have an ability to take the passion and the belief and the goal of the parents and translate it into something that the legislators can actually wrap their arms around and do something with. And one point that I missed earlier that I think is crucial, and that is there's something known as co-sponsors. I mentioned earlier that if a legislator has an idea, the legislator can see that a piece of legislation is drafted and be the sponsor. What's also important is the likelihood of a bill actually getting heard is strengthened by how many co-sponsors the bill has. And I know there are some legislatures in the country that do this. There are some legislatures in the country that they vote on every single bill that's introduced one way or another, which is an incredible amount of work that they can't really spend a whole lot of time with any one bill. South Carolina, for a bill to actually get a hearing, to begin the process of looking forward to becoming a law, that's an achievement for it to actually get a hearing, for it to be heard. It's a lot better than it used to be. It used to be you had to be a really powerful legislator for your bill to get a hearing. Mm-hmm. But now things like sponsorship helps. So if people who share this belief in this potential change for this legislation, if they contact their legislators, and their legislators may not be on the committee, but they can be sponsors, they can be co-sponsors of the bill. So let's say there are 124 House members, there are 46 senators. Let's say if our bill had, of the 46 senators, 30 co-sponsors, or 25 or even 20, sometimes even 10, then the Senate as a whole gets the message, hey, wow, at least half or a third of our colleagues think this bill is important. It's got all these co-sponsors. We need to have a hearing. We need to bring people to Columbia to talk and testify and tell us what this thing means to them so that we can see if that's something we need to pass. So even if your member is not on the committee, everybody's got a member of the legislature. Everybody's got a member of the House. Everybody's got also a member of the Senate. So when you come to Columbia, you've got two people that you can talk to, your senator who represents you and your House member who also represents you in the other body. If they both become co-sponsors, then it starts to get a little momentum. Momentum is really important for legislation, and co-sponsors is a way of getting that momentum.
Fantastic. So it's complicated a little bit, it sounds like, but it's worth us jumping into this work. So I want to talk about, how do you get those conversations going? Because it sounds like what you said, what I'm lifting from this is that these are still everyday people, right? These are people that we might go to church with. As you said, this is where we get their attention. We might tug on them and we speak loud enough and we're memorable. And I know, Ellen, I'm not sure if you're still there, or Oren, you can talk about that. She's there. So talk to us a little bit about this. So when we're saying we might have these co-sponsors and all these different people there, how do we start to make these approaches? Like, what does that look like? How do we approach the legislatures and make the ask?
Well, I think like organizations like MySC Education, Palmetto Promise, we not only work with lawmakers to talk about the nuts and bolts of the policy, the really important details that have to be correct for it to be good policy. We also try to serve as a facilitator. Think of us as a bridge that parents or people who are advocating for other issues can walk across to help connect them with the process. It is a crazy process. And sometimes, even those of us who work in it all day, every day, get confused by what is happening because everything can happen so quickly. We talked about things happening really slowly, which is usually how it goes. But sometimes when things gets up ahead of steam, it happens quickly. You're like, wait a second, what just happened here? And so we want to be facilitators to make this easy for people. We know that parents a lot of times are just trying to live their everyday life. They've got to put food on the table. They've got to make sure the kids do their homework. They've got to walk the dogs. I mean, like life keeps you busy, and not everybody has to be a policy expert to be engaged in the process. So what I would encourage you to do is to find groups that you trust, whether it be Palmetto Promise or MySC Education or other groups who are working at the state level, who can be a resource to help connect you, who are kind of keeping an eye on the State House and saying, hey, you know what, there's something important going on here that I think parents are going to want to know about. And I think that's what's so critical, Shawnette, about the work that you're doing, is that you are being that resource for parents. Parents can connect with you on Facebook. They can go to the mysceducation.org website and find good information. So I think finding people who are involved in the process, who you can partner with, goes a long way. The other thing that I'll say is that don't be afraid here. I'll turn this way a little bit. Don't be afraid to just get in there and make it personal. You don't have to know every single word of every single bill in order for your voice to matter. The most powerful thing you can do most of the time is just tell your story. What happened to you? Why did it happen to you? And why are you talking to your lawmaker about it? What do you want them to do to help you address this challenge that you or your child are facing? And so I think sometimes just keeping it simple is the most important thing. And so even though we have this crazy complicated diagram, that it is important to know, right? Because if you don't know how the process works, you're dead in the water. So that's why I'm so thankful for Oren's expertise, because he knows how to navigate the system. But your voice matters throughout the entire process. Even though maybe a subcommittee is the only place that you can speak in person or testify publicly on a bill, you can be talking to your lawmaker or your senator anytime you want as it moves through that process. And so groups like My SC Education or Palmetto Promise, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll invest in special advocacy software that will help us send out emails or text messages to people who say, hey, I want to know what's going on. When there's a big education bill going down, I want to know what's happening. So that's where our job comes in, to alert parents to where something is in the process and to say, hey, if you call now, your voice will be heard, your voice will make a difference. And so a lot of times those tools can even make advocacy easy for a busy parent, because I know what we'll do sometimes is we will write a sample message, and then you can take that message and customize it to say anything you want to say, but we've at least gotten you off the blank page. A lot of these tools will also help you find your lawmaker. Although you don't have to use one of our tools to do that. You can actually go to the State House website. And I know, Shawnette, you're going to provide that information later on. But anyway, I guess to wrap all of that rambling up, I'll just say, don't be afraid to just keep it simple and tell your story.
Yes, and Ellen, you can attest to this for me, and I think I've seen growth, but I'll speak to my own growth. Initially, when I was getting into this work and working with Palmetto Promise, I was so worried about sounding right or speaking the language of the lawmakers and, coming across as this uber professional and really second guessing myself. But then I came to the conclusion, you all, that just be myself. Just
yes.
About things the way that I know and not worry about being anything other than me. And I'll just be real, because that's what I notice gets heard. And even the positive feedback that I would get from after testifying at a hearing or something is when I kind of just, I guess, blacked out and turned into just regular Shawnette and forgot any credentials and forgot anything and just said, I'm just going to speak my passion. Within reason. I didn't blow up, right?
That's right.
So there was a moment at the State House one time where I probably could have.
And you were being disrespected, to be clear. I've never really seen anything like that, and you kept your cool.
I did, and I'll tell you guys, we were at a hearing talking about education scholarship accounts, and I work with a team of people, and I'm not going to pretend to know something about something that I don't know. I am very passionate about the side of parents and what it looks like in the system. I feel like I'm a very knowledgeable educator, but sometimes when the money, all those talks of how the bill will satisfy in the education scholarship account, and I was up against a senator representative, and I think he wanted to try to challenge me in that and make it seem like parents didn't know. And I'll tell you guys, he said to me that parents, and I'm not mincing words, and can I say the name? I think so. It's public record, right, Ellen?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so it is. But Representative Rutherford, I just think it's important to know how this was. He said to me that parents don't know enough about education or not educated enough to be able to choose their child's own education. And in that moment right there, I should have been flipping tables, right? And I should have gone off and I should have turned into a Jeff Bliss to sit here and tell me as a parent to my face that I was not smart enough to make education choices for my child. But in that moment, I realized, I said, you know what? No matter what credentials and the background information I gave, that didn't matter. I just needed to be me and speak real and speak truth to power in terms of you listen, I tell you the truth. So I learned, and it works better in not trying to be somebody other than yourself. But you'll be surprised, y'all, if you haven't been, and I'm interested, y'all can let me know if you haven't been in those situations to see, how it happens and what it looks like. That was my first, it was exciting for me because, like I said, I like some of that, just to get into some good conversation, and I don't mind a good debate. But wow, I was flabbergasted about that. But just be yourself. Here's a question. I'll ask this to you, Ellen. So are there any pro tips for persuading legislators who are not usually open to school choice? Like, what are things that we can say?
I think talking to them about how it benefits their community. I think about, especially in rural communities in our state, school choice could be a game changer in terms of giving parents who don't currently have a choice access to a choice. And it's amazing how when we look at states where there is choice, I always take the example of Florida because they have some of the biggest and oldest choice programs in the country. They haven't destroyed public education, which is always the talking point that you hear, that if there are more choices, it's going to hurt public education and it's going to hurt kids in public schools. The exact opposite has actually happened. Public schools in Florida and students in those schools in Florida are doing better than they have ever done. Students with special needs are getting scholarships to get the needs that they have actually met. Students who are from low and middle income families who may not be able to afford a choice, but who needed a different choice are now getting access to the education that they need. And so, I would just encourage lawmakers who are not supportive of this idea to get out of the dogma and the political talking points of the past and actually look at the proof of what is working in other states. We know it works. It's not some kind of pie in the sky theory that's never been tested before. We've got 20 plus years under our belt of proof that when you put kids at the middle of the decision-making matrix, good stuff happens for everyone.
Absolutely. And let's bring up our next slide. Was Lauren about to say something or?
Yeah, just amen.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's pull up that next back to the slide in terms of specifically what to say to your legislator as well. And here are some of the tips that we suggest in doing that and being able to follow. So, it's I think when we say you're trying to convince them a bit of like what this would do within their communities and how it would make a difference, we can really only speak to, number one, our sense of unease in our child's current situation a lot of times. And I think it does save us sometimes, depending on what position you're in, what role you have within your community, you can speak the most confidently about your own experience. And it's really hard for someone to go against you and say that's not true if you're talking from your own experience. Like, how can you tell me what I experienced wasn't real? Versus when we try to speak too broadly like that. I think that's kind of the job of like My IC Education and Palmetto Promise, is to take all these stories together and give them the data and the statistics and the facts. But you're going to always find people who are able to, I guess, try to discredit some of the research. But there's no way that they can discredit your personal experience and for you to say, this is what exactly happened to me. I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody else. And I'm sure I could probably find a ton of parents who this exact thing happened to, but you can't tell me that I'm lying about my own experience. Like, because I've been at the hearings where when we're giving all these facts, they're like, oh, are you sure? And of course I can pull data that says otherwise. I mean, I've seen it on our Facebook posts sometimes, and people will tell me, Ellen just spoke about how public schools are thriving in Florida amidst having choice, yet even if we put that data together, you're going to have people who are like, nope, that's not true. So it's best to speak from your view, your personal, situation, your own story, and being able to tell them even on a personal level why that legislation is needed for yourself, and asking them, to tell you what action they could take, or you even being able to say, this is what you could do to make this better. Ellen or Oren, did you want to add to that? Or
yeah, well, just this election that we just went through, people talked about the red states and the blue states and the swing states. When it comes to legislators, there are people that are right now, today, predictable of where they are on a given set of issues. Mm-hmm. And one thing we do is to try to look into our crystal ball and figure out who potentially is with us, who is potentially not going to be supportive of us, and then who are the swing. It's like swing states. There are swing elected officials. And, for the most part, and I apologize again to you, Shawnette, for the experience that you had in that notorious committee hearing that day. Yeah. But a lot of legislators on a lot of these issues, they're really in the middle. And they, if someone is telling them something, the old phrase, I was in the room where it happened. And if a parent is saying, look, I was in the principal's office where it happened, or I was in the classroom when it happened, those stories are going to carry some weight with people who are probably kind of on the fence. So there's a wide range of swing legislators who have not made up their minds.
So would you
position to be in, because you only need a majority to swing it to a win.
So would you say that it's because I had this myth in my head that they come into these sessions with their minds made up already? Like, I think there's just been moments or experiences, or sometimes when you feel like you're not winning at the state house, that it's like, oh, they had already had their minds made up. But you're saying that a good number of them really have not fully decided, and it can be the voice of the parent or strong advocates who can tip the scale.
I think enough, right? I think enough have not decided that they could. They could either tip the scale for the bill, or they could turn the bill from barely passing into a rout, into a major landslide win on the floor of the House or the Senate. So I don't think we ought to assume too much that that legislators are programmed and all locked in necessarily, because you just don't really always know who you're talking to. You could be talking to somebody who your story is all it takes to move them. On the slide here, you've got a lot of great advice. And one thing, this is going to sound very elementary, but one thing I learned at the State House that's absolutely crucial, or over the phone or email or whatever, is if the idea has been turned into legislation, every piece of legislation has a number. And most legislators, you can start describing a bill to them in about 5 seconds. They're going to say, okay, what's the bill number? Because they are so overwhelmed, sometimes they have to look it up themselves. So knowing the bill number, and you have an example, or you have another way of saying that, being well informed, knowing the bill number is really important.
Absolutely.
That's something that we, as the people who work in Columbia every day, want to equip parents or other advocates to have on issues that they care about.
Is bill number, is that what you're talking about specifically?
Yes, absolutely. And just those little nuance of details that you're not going to just have your average person on the street be able to go in and navigate the State House website and figure out what the piece of legislation is and what the bill number is. I mean, it's an old government website.
Yeah, I will say that. I'm going to pinpoint and direct you guys to the website at the end of this session and everything, so that you can find your legislator and things like that. But it's not the most sophisticated, at least not in South Carolina, I would agree. But I think that's a great thing. And to note, Palmetto Promise specifically, because I'll tell you, if you contact my IC Education, is something I don't know, I'm still calling Palmetto Promise and saying, what does this mean in this bill? So that's also what we're here for, is that if you're looking up the bill and you go read the law, and I spent time, and I'll read the law, especially when I was heavy into charter work and reading the charter law, and I'm like, this is like in a foreign language. And so part of my job, part of Palmetto Promise's job, is to serve as that translator so that we can know what we're speaking to. Sometimes with these bills, it could be the difference between and versus or that makes the law change and how you interpret it. So I want to let people know too that we're here to help interpret those things so that you can understand moving forward. And you guys have heard me talk about this in other sessions, like that puts you in a position of power. Like my role to work with parents is not to just make you feel empowered and happy that this stuff is happening, but I want you to be in a position of power to do things. And part of that is just either knowing, number one, your resources, knowing where to go, able to get these questions answered, knowing where to go to be able to get these things figured out. And it's okay that you didn't find it on your own. It's okay that you were able to pick up the phone, either call me or make a call into Palmetto Promise and say, I'm reading this. Can you translate this to make it easier? Because just that one piece of information can really move your advocacy work to the next level, because it's like, I know it now and I can speak about it with authority. For me, that's one thing that holds me back, is if I just feel like I'm completely in the dark and I don't understand something and I can't speak about something with authority, I have to get that clarification.
Hey, Shawnette.
Yeah.
I'm remembering an incident in the lobby once while I was up there. A friend of mine and I were working on a piece of legislation, and the legislator comes out and says, "What's the bill number?" And we told him the bill number, and then he started trying to get into all these intricate questions about Section 3 and Section 4 and Section 5. And I was new, I was young, so I took the bait. I started down the road of, well, Section 3 is absolutely essential, and we start going on all this stuff. Finally, the person that was with me, who was 20 years older, had been doing this forever, he just kind of puts his hand up and he says, look, the bill number is H3235, and we're for it. That's all you need to know. And that was very aggressive with a legislator, but the reason that he was able to do that is he was the head of an association that had 3,500 members, and that bill was it was related to their world. And the legislator, just as if a light bulb goes off, and he goes, okay, I've got it. I'll vote for it.
Yeah.
And I said, like, well, why didn't I think of that? And so sometimes going through the minutia isn't really necessary. Just say, look, I live in your district. It's H3245. I am for it because of the experience of my family. So that's enough. Amazing.
Yeah. And I think that no. And as we get, as we're coming to the end here, and again, if you guys have any questions specifically, and if I'm not able to answer it now, we'll make sure that we follow up, or any of those things, just please let me know. Or if you'd like to come on camera to share something, that's fine as well in our last moments of this. But I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this session, just to let everybody out there know that this isn't rocket science, that it's not the hardest work. It can seem complicated. It can seem very intimidating. I still sometimes have to shake all those things off when I'm asked to come to the State House to testify or to do those things. I get uber nervous. I get nervous even in these settings, or if I'm doing the news and working with media, I'm still a little flustered and things like that, because you don't want to say the wrong things. But I think, give yourself some credit in terms of, as long as you're speaking your truth, you're sharing your story, you're going from your experiences, or even if you're out there and you are representing a coalition of parents or families or a group of people, that as long as you're capturing what they're telling you, you can't go wrong with that. And that it's okay, and that we're here to then try to help, package it the right way and make the connections in the best way, and give you some advice in terms of how to get it into the right people. But that the very start of this work, I do think it's your passion for what needs to change. It's going back to that human action grassroots model, and it's saying, okay, how do I make a change? And then it's connecting with the right folks to make it happen. So Ellen, I see you kind of look poised to where there's something you want to add.
I was just going to say, the word that comes to mind for me is amplify. What I want to do is take the experience and the needs of parents and amplify those to the people who can do something about it. You just have to know as a parent that your voice and your experience matters. And we're going to need your voice, and we're going to need your experience coming up. Oren talked about the really complicated diagram of how a bill becomes a law. And we're actually getting ready to start legislative session. Right after the holidays, lawmakers are going to come back on January the 12th, and they are going to start the first year of a 2-year session of the General Assembly here in Columbia. And it is very much on lawmakers' minds, and on the governor's mind too, the challenges that parents and students are facing. Certainly before COVID, but my goodness, now in light of everything that has happened with school closures, And just with the various challenges that our students are facing in this pandemic, I mean, we're going to have to work harder than ever to make sure that our students don't fall further behind. And so there's going to be a lot of different legislative pushes that are going to be happening. And we're going to be on the front lines. We're going to be watching what's happening, and we're going to be trying to keep you informed about how you can use your voice. Everything we've been talking about today, how you can use your voice to impact change, first of all, for your child, but also for the larger population of children in this state who need something different. So I'm excited, Shawnette. I'm so glad you're doing this work because I think too often people don't know what to do. Like you said, they're not in power because they just don't know where to start. And this is the first step toward empowerment and towards being in power. So I'm so honored to be part of this conversation today.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for being a part of that. And Oren as well for giving us that broad view. For me, I think there's a balance, and I think that we have to have all sides. And I never know what people want to know or need to know, or sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so it's important for me to present as much of it. And, hopefully if we've shared some stuff and you're like, I already knew that, then you might have, you tuned that out just a little bit, but then your ears perked up when it was something that maybe you didn't know. Or another piece of advocacy is gathering this information for people who also are just completely not in the know. So maybe some things that we've talked about, okay, you've experienced this, you're good to go. It's solidifying for you. Because I think I've needed those experiences in this work as well, that maybe I've gone to another workshop or training or heard information that I've heard before, but it helps as a reminder to know I'm on the right track of this work. But it also helps for me to then be able to share this with other people, because I think we as parents, we're all at different levels. We all have different experiences with things. And for me, even though I get nervous a little bit, it's not that big of a deal for me to have a conversation in front of a camera, or to go to the State House anymore, or to talk to different people. But for some people, I think of my cousin, and she got a grant. She's in the state of Indiana, and they made them do a press conference. She was almost in tears over a 30-second just introducing herself and talking. And she was just having a stressful time. In my mind, I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. You just need to say who you are, what you guys do, and keep it pushing. And she was like, you don't understand. I get stage fright. This is too much. And so I guess I try to put myself in the shoes of people who are at all these different levels. Some people have it and it's no big deal. And there's others out there who are just completely terrified. And it's usually those ones who are completely terrified who have the best stories and who have
That's so true. So true. And that's a great point, actually, Shawnette. Like, I want to encourage people that there are many ways and many platforms that you can use to tell your story. Public speaking may not be your thing. And like you said, when it's usually those stories that come from the heart that are real, that people are most scared to tell. So take courage in that, but also realize there are other ways you can share your voice. You can write it out. If you go to mysceducation.org, you can actually see a lot of stories where we've just talked, privately, one-on-one on the phone with people, gotten their permission, said, hey, would you allow us to tell your story? And so that's a great way for us to put it where many people can read it. It doesn't take much time, a 10 to 15 minute phone call, or you can write your own story and send it to us. But again, that gets back to that idea of like, we can help amplify your voice. It doesn't always have to be you in front of a microphone talking to people. There are a lot of ways. Although that microphone is important.
It is important. And I just want to add as we close, for those, because I've had the question before, people saying, well, what's happening with my story, or the right people reading it, or people seeing it? You guys, it is so important that we collect that. Even it might feel like it's just living on our website, or that we just took this information, but we're using that information. When we were at the Supreme Court, South Carolina Supreme Court, with the SAFE grants, and that information, those stories became a part of an affidavit that we wrote to share that. Or it gives me power to where when I am talking to a lawmaker, and it's not like I'm making things up, I can say there's a parent in Greenwood, or a parent in Greenville, or a parent in Columbia who said this. And then if they want to fact check me, I can say, well, you can go to the website and this is exactly what they said. Because sometimes, they might think, oh, you're making that up, or it's not that many people. I'm like, no, there really was like 15,000 people who had interest in this. I'm not just making up these parents. So I just want people to know that your stories, the things that you say, they do matter. And even if immediately you don't see things happening or you don't feel like it's being heard, your voice is being heard and it's being used as ammunition. Like, that's the way that I think of it, is that this is being loaded in our, I don't want a gun, but it's our ammunition to where when we go in and we're being a part of this fight, that I can go through this and I can bring, it makes me think about with Miss Virginia. And if you've seen that movie and how on the steps she had the backpacks full of actual the petitions that were signed, that's powerful. When she brought them in and she was pulling them out of the backpack saying, look, people have signed this. You know what I mean? And these are the things. It's like, this is real. I'm not just making it up. So there's a moment where it becomes important for you guys to have that. So just want to reiterate that. Before we close and before I give my final call to action, is there anything else that you, Orrin or Ellen, want to share? And again, if there's anyone who's watching, if there's something that you want to add, please just let me know before we end. Go ahead. No? Ellen turned the camera on you, Orrin. So
well, yes. Then I will say something. I'm like you, Shawnette. You put the camera on me, I'm going to say something. I just kind of wanted to say that change is possible. In watching the legislature for so many years, a lot of things that people said would never happen have happened, and it started with people telling their stories and getting those personal interactions with those legislators that over time chipped away at the behemoth that did not want it to happen, but it eventually did because of a lot of little. It was one conversation at a time, and it can be done. It just takes resilience and the ability to speak out and to not think it's impossible to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's important. And I love that word resiliency. And that's what I'm asking for us all to do, is to be resilient with one another. I want to go ahead and pull up our final slide, that call to action here. And there's 3 things that I want to ask that we all do. Number 1, find your legislators, right? Know who it is that you are going to be addressing. And so we have up there, and we may be able to quickly also put that as a link in the chat section. I know I'm putting Bram and Joe to work in the back end, but if we can get that added there. But it's just going to the South Carolina government website. Even if you went directly to just www.statehouse.gov, it'll lead you to this information, but there's a place for you to be able to put in your address, and it pulls up who your lawmakers are. And then this is for the state level, but I do know even in the city that you live in, most of our cities have these kind of websites to where you can do something similar. I know in Aiken County, it's not as clear, but there's ways to be able to figure that out, and even knowing like what district you're part of as far as like your school board and things like that. It's important to be connected to just to know who it is that you would be talking to, who you would need to write to if necessary. The second thing that I really want to encourage you all to do, if you haven't done so already, is join the Parent Power Movement. We have an active Facebook group that is growing, and there we look for you guys to also just to strike that conversation, to share your ideas, to ask questions. It's not necessarily always about me being able to just give feedback, but it's for us to converse with one another. We learn best from each other and what is happening within our communities. And I really want to create a platform where parents can be a resource to each other, parents, adult allies, guardians, all those interested in education. So our Parent Power group has become a place to really be able to get some good information, and to really be able to push forward and share and get a lot from one another. So I want to encourage you all to be there. And then also, please, as Ellen said, share your story. We really, really want you to share your story. You can share your story directly with me. You can share your story on the Mindset Education website. We're happy to have a phone call. You can contact Palmetto Promise, and you can do that as well. So thank you guys. If that is it, and if there's nothing else, I know I've reached my time. That's 1:37, and I know I kept you 7 minutes longer than what I had anticipated. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we close out? Because once they hit end broadcast, that's it.
Thanks for having us, Shawnette. Great to be with you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Yes. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year. Thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you for working with us in some of our technical difficulties. We are going to continue to embrace technology and work through these things, and we are going to make it happen. My goal is to have other opportunities. Please let me know if there's things that you want to talk about and questions that I can answer for you. I am happy to listen to that and make it happen. We have some great connections, and I'm sure Ellen and Orrin will be happy to come back again with their expertise. We'll keep doing this as many times as you all need. If parents say they need it, we're going to provide it. So thank you all so much for being here with me today. All right.